University of South Dakota decides that white law students are simply taking up space if they don't shut themselves up in the presence of minority students. By that logic, Bernie, Joe, and Liz ought to just vanish and let Corey and Kamala run the show. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses worldwide. Today, we're discussing a survey that found that 73% of college Republicans, 73, hid their political views out of fear that their grades would suffer if they spoke their minds. Plus, Notre Dame in the news again. Seriously, Katie, if you dropped a consecrated host and dragged it through the quad, do you think you'd be able to sniff out one actual Catholic on that campus? Once again, Catholic institution Notre Dame says the university unfairly normalizes heterosexuality on campus over LGBTQ students. But we start at the University of South Dakota, where a flowchart was recently used to tell non-minority students, aka white people, that they're taking up space if they're in the presence of minorities and they presume to have an opinion about anything. And at the University of South Dakota, hardly progressive Massachusetts or California, you have basically an argument being made by law professors that, when you're in the presence of minority law students, you really shouldn't say anything if you're white. If you're white, you're imposing yourself in space, right? If you shut up, you're creating safe spaces for minorities. Now, as much as I would like lawyers to shut up, as much as I would like a gag order on lawyers, to do this in a law school for white law students is a very tricky gambit. What if they shut up by not paying their tuition dues? You be okay with that, South Dakota?
That would be an interesting premise. This story actually came out of the campus reform and only was obtained and learned about because they had to do a Freedom of Information Act request on this, and they found that the University of South Dakota had made this and showed this flow chart to these incoming law students. So this was actually at the diversity orientation presentation. So they got it slapped on them immediately, and it was in 2018. And it actually encourages any of the non-minoritized, is how the terminology, non-minoritized voices, to consider whether or not they're, quote, taking up space. And so they have this flow chart, and you can see exactly what it says. They're supposed to go through it for themselves and then ask themselves these questions, such as, will you be representing a relevant minoritized identity? Will you, if you were in law school?
So if you are white male and you speak at all, you have to speak on behalf of a minority.
Will you be?
But isn't that a cultural appropriation?
It is.
If white people, the white knight syndrome, where I try to speak for, that I have some ability to understand the suffering of minorities by championing minorities in the time that I get to speak, aren't I appropriating?
Well, so in that case, I'm going to go with, you're going to say nope, because the answers aren't even yes or no, it's yep and nope. All right, so you say nope. So then will relevant minoritized identities be present? Now, what does that necessarily mean? Present how?
I'll tell you what that means. Any space that does not have primarily minorities or a significant number of them is an invalid space. So here's the thing. If you're white in a room with you could have 20 prospective white lawyers, male and female, and one minority voice, at which point the conversation has to be dominated by the one minority, or the other 20 white people have to speak on behalf of minorities. And then if you were to get together in a room with just the 20 white people so they could talk to each other, that would be an invalid space.
That's how
it is. You need a flow chart.
A flow chart.
A flow chart to be able to handle this.
And you need yep and nope. And at the end, you are either going to be deemed you are probably taking up space or you're probably contributing to a space.
And note, you contribute by not contributing.
Exactly.
That's what we've got here. You contribute as a pasty white dude or girl, chick, by not saying things. You are more productive. And I wonder, how do you bill for that when you actually get into legal service? When you actually get into practice, you hang your shingle out there and you're a lawyer, right? And the one thing you've learned from South Dakota Law School is that in the presence of minorities, you cannot speak, right? Or you have to appropriate black speech and black culture to talk for them. Exactly. Which is also a pain in the butt.
Well, the good thing is this summer, the South Dakota Board of Regents President Kevin Schieffer actually announced that he was opening an investigation into the diversity offices of South Dakota at all their universities to determine whether or not these offices are pushing a left-leaning political agenda. All right, it's open. and shut, because yes, they are. That's all we need to do.
Speaking of which, we have a related story. University of South Dakota. You're in South Dakota, right? This is not Berkeley, California.
Apparently
it's
it is.
South friggin' Dakota, right? Where they within our great-grandfather's day, they were shooting each other on the streets, right? Now this is what you get, the sissification of South Dakota. You have the same university whose president, Sheila G-String. Is that how you pronounce that?
I would say Gestring.
I'm sure it's Gestring, but I'm going to call her G-String. At the university whose president is Gestring, President Sheila G-String was on camera during a, quote, free speech and intellectual diversity forum. And let this sink in. Free speech and intellectual diversity, the two things we conservatives want, right? Let us speak our damn minds, white or not. And how about some diversity for a change? And what does President G-String do besides posing seductively in her bathing suit? What does President G-String do? She basically sells out and attacks conservatives.
Of course. So the premise of this was there was a Democrat lawmaker who criticized a Republican-led intellectual diversity and free speech letter. And all of this goes back to, in June, the Board of Regents in South Dakota, they passed a free speech legislation, HB 1087. So a Democrat critiqued the Republican letter, and I'm going to read what the Republican letter actually included in a second. But the Democrat critiqued it, and Gestring praised the Democrat as being, quote, brilliant. And here's what the actual letter said. It included, how dare they say that at the universities that they would create hiring practices to ensure the composition of the faculty and administration reflecting a broad range, not narrow, broad range of ideological viewpoints, and that the universities must explore and implement seminars, lecture series, courses, programs, fellow options, all of this stuff that includes things such as American constitutional heritage, conservative political thought, the great books. Remember the great books?
And
Western civilization.
What gets me about this is that what this Democrat is objecting to is the idea that we would have a broad notion of diversity. This is exactly what they say they want when it comes to anybody but white people, right? A broad notion of diversity that doesn't include conservative values.
And the Democrat, in response to that, those ideas of the great books being actually taught, that Democrat called those ideas disrespectful, repugnant, embarrassing, presumptuous, shameful, close-minded, and a violent interference upon our educational institution. It cannot stand in the record without being challenged.
So, in other words, to diversify actually intellectually, to represent radically underrepresented books and positions is now an affront to our progressive university.
Listen to what G-String says, because this was a live forum.
I knew you'd come around to G-String. I knew you would.
At the very end, I'll do it just one time.
It is dangerous right now. I will tell you, for all of you that have your fears, I'm terrified that this is live streamed. This is not an uncomfortable or not a very comfortable time for a university administrator or a faculty member.
They don't even have the cojones to just admit what they are. Right? That they pretend. Sheila G-String goes through this dog and pony show where she can't even get through the forum with a straight face before she sells out conservatives and basically agrees with a radical progressive attack on free speech and diversity of thought. And now she's worried that somebody might have heard it. Well, we've all heard it. Why don't you just admit it, G-String, that you are only interested in the progressives, that you're doing this because you don't want to have Republican lawmakers take any of your money away? Let's just call a G-String a G-String.
Moving on, a poll shows that 73% of Republicans have withheld their political views over grade fears. That's actually not that surprising to me, but a survey was done by College Pulse, and it was of 1,000 Republican and even Republican-leaning college students. And again, 73% of them are saying, you know what? I'm not going to put my viewpoints out there because my grade is going to suffer. The question specifically said, have you ever withheld your political views in class for fear that your grades would suffer? And they also found that in addition to the 73 who identify as strong Republican, 71% of students who identify as weak Republicans all said yes.
This is where we show Captain Obvious's face. Duh. Of course that's the case. Every semester I ask my kids, 3 weeks ago, did it this semester? Raise your hand, I said to my students. In all 3 classes, raise your hand if you've ever had to not write your opinion or say your opinion because you were afraid of having your grade docked. 80% of the hands went up. Freshmen. Let me repeat this. I had a class of freshmen, first semester freshmen 3 weeks ago. They've been on campus 2 weeks. And I asked them, In the course of your high school or college career, how many times have you had to withhold your opinion because you knew your teacher or professor would punish you if you expressed it? And 90% of those kids raised their hand. And then always the follow-up course. Now I say, raise your hand if the offending professor was a right-wing militant Republican. No. And in fact, they laugh out loud. They laugh out loud because they know that a right-wing, ultra-right-wing conservative Republican professor is about as likely to turn up as a leprechaun riding a unicorn.
Some of these comments, I mean, you're getting students at your own university, but some of the comments, because you could actually comment on this survey, said various things that just explained just like that. From Clemson, someone wrote, when writing papers for gen ed classes, absolutely. I know a guy who chose to write a pro-border wall argumentative essay for our super liberal professor, and the prof just wrote, quote, this whole paper is one big fallacy, and bombed him. Me, I wrote about the evils of horse racing. Perfectly safe topic.
Yeah.
It's exactly what happens.
And that's what they do. And I've had students do it in my classes again, too. They've been trained to think that any argument that is made that doesn't support a progressive cause, any website, any journal, any newspaper, any news source that cites that argument has to be invalid. So right away, your professors have given themselves a tool for censorship, right? Where do you get that information from? Well, I read my Bible, fallacious salt. Where did you find that from? I found it from Fox News, wrong answer. Where did you get that information from? Anything that is not a progressive, it could even be MSNBC. It could even be something like Slate magazine. In the rare instances where they actually concede a point to Republicans, you cite that source, the information itself, whoever reports it invalidates you. And so you have a completely decked stack system here for these kids.
All right, one more example from Notre Dame. I actually got yelled at by a professor for my views on gun control. It wasn't an argument or anything, just plain one-sided insulting.
That's right. Notre Shame. It keeps coming up again and again and again. Speaking of Notre Dame.
Yes. The newest student leaders at Notre Dame, again, a once Catholic university, the new student body leadership, they're calling for changing the policy about heteronormativity that is happening at Notre Dame. The student president, Elizabeth Boyle,
who we've done stories on before, piece of work.
So Elizabeth Boyle wrongfully normalizes heterosexuality over homosexuality. That's what she's saying Notre Dame is doing, wrongfully normalizing that silly heterosexuality. And so they're talking specifically about dorm policy. So Boyle and her vice president, Patrick Maguire, want more equitable and inclusivity. They claim the LGBT community may find dorm rooms to be too heteronormative and not safe spaces. And basically because at Notre Dame, they currently have single-sex rooms, and they have the all-male and the all-female residence halls, and that's not safe in their mind.
No, of course not. And what this is it's forcing Notre Dame to dragging Notre Dame professors and administrators to their knees to comply, right? You are not a Christian university unless you reject your Christian values, your Catholic values, and you embrace any aspect of the non-religious, secular, radicalized culture. But let's be clear. This is not like Notre Dame is being forced to their knees. Notre Dame is happy to comply to this kind of stuff. So the idea that you're sending your kids to a Catholic college, the idea that Catholic identity has any real place on Notre Dame's campus, and the fact that the faculty at Notre Dame and the administration, that includes the board apparently, is willing to undercut Christian values in the name of radically anti-Christian groups, spend your money somewhere else.
Yeah, just so everyone's aware, the members of Boyle's student government, they are planning to work to end a long-standing campus policy that forbids any students from spending the night in the dorms of the opposite sex. They're planning to eliminate pariah tolls, according to an internal email that they obtained. And that's the rule that prohibits students from occupying the dorms of the opposite sex during the nighttime. So
in other words, Notre Dame actually is being anti-gay. Hear me out on this. Notre Dame has a policy where boys can't spend the night in girls' dorms and vice versa, which means boys must sleep in dorms with boys and girls with girls. That's the current standing policy, which preferences gay students. By getting rid of that now, you are actually engaging in heteronormativity.
Wow. That's a good one. Boyle said she personally supports allowing the transgender students, that's what this is about, the transgender students, to live in a dorm that corresponds to their gender identity.
So she's a 20-year-old college senior, and her personal preference is that 2,000 years of Roman Catholic theology and sexual education teaching has to bow to her whim.
Yes.
Okay, that's want to make that clear.
That's where we're at.
And if it doesn't, heteronormativity.
She also says that they're taking steps to address this heteronormativity through the distribution of the Ally in Safe Space pins, stickers, and signs to the rectors and resident assistants. Huzzah!
Huzzah indeed. And isn't it amazing how the Bible, the most influential and widely read book in human history, now has been conquered by LGBTQ pins and gewgaws. Welcome to America, century 21.
Well, that's all we have for today. Don't forget to share this episode and subscribe to the free audio podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, and everywhere else. Visit drdukeshow.com, subscribe for free, and then leave us a 5-star review so we can grow the show.
And that does it for us. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time for Freedom Project. I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. And until next time, stay educated, my friends.